Goldman Sachs just became the single largest institutional XRP holder in the United States. $153.8 million, spread across 4 separate ETF issuers. The first time the bank has ever placed XRP alongside Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana in its structured product holdings. And somehow, XRP is down. Not up, not flat, down. Trading near $1.45, roughly 60% below its July 2025 peak. On the same week, Goldman's position became public. If Goldman buying $153 million of your asset can't move the price, what exactly is the market waiting for? Here is the part that reframes everything. A Coinbase and EY Parthenon survey of 351 institutional investors found that 25% plan to add XRP to their portfolios in 2026. Sounds bullish, but read the next number carefully. 65% of those same investors said regulatory clarity is the single condition holding them back. Not the technology, not the team, not the network. One that converts XRP's current commodity classification, which exists right now as a joint SEC and CFTC opinion, into permanent, untouchable federal statute. The Clarity Act, the bill that passed the House 294 to 134. The bill that has been sitting in the Senate Banking Committee for nearly a year. The bill that Ripple President Monica Lom says has institutional partnerships locked behind NDAs that expire the moment it passes. Goldman already moved. 65% of institutions are still waiting. And the window that determines whether they wait 6 more weeks or 6 more years is closing right now. So here is the structural question nobody is framing correctly. If Goldman Sachs, the most risk-disciplined major bank in American finance, disclosed a 153.8 million XRP position in February, spread across 4 issuers in a construction that Ripple's own market analysis describes as a deliberate long-duration institutional strategy, what do they know that the 65% sitting on the sideline are still waiting for official confirmation of? And more importantly, why does the answer to that question hinge on a single Senate committee markup that still has no date on the calendar? This is XRP News Flow Signals. We do not report on price candles. We track the documented institutional, legislative, and regulatory mechanics that determine where the price goes before the market figures it out. And right now, those mechanics are converging on a specific legal event. Not a rumor, not a projection. A structural transformation from regulatory opinion to federal statute that has a documented deadline and a documented consequence if it misses. Let me walk you through the full picture, starting with what Goldman's position actually signals and what it does not. Let's be precise about what Goldman Sachs disclosed, because the interpretation of this development is being handled sloppily in almost every channel covering it. Goldman holds $153.8 million across 4 XRP ETF issuers, 21 shares, Bitwise, Franklin Templeton, and Grayscale. The weighting across those 4 is nearly equal, which is the structural detail that matters most. This is not a concentration bet on one product. It is a deliberate exposure distribution across the entire XRP ETF complex simultaneously. Bloomberg analysts have noted that Goldman's position likely reflects trading desk facilitation activity, meaning Goldman is helping clients get exposure, not necessarily expressing a pure directional conviction from its own balance sheet. That distinction is important, and most coverage is skipping it. But here is why the distinction makes it more significant, not less. Goldman's trading desk builds this kind of position in response to client demand. The $153.8 million is not Goldman deciding XRP is a good bet. It is Goldman responding to institutional clients who are already asking for XRP exposure in volume large enough to require a formal structured position. The clients came first. The Goldman position is the evidence that they did. And those clients, the institutions driving Goldman's facilitation activity, are the same category of investor that the Coinbase and EY Parthenon survey is describing. 25% plan to add XRP in 2026. 65% are waiting for the legal framework. Goldman is already in because their clients are already asking. The 65% are still waiting because their compliance departments have not yet received the one signal that closes the gap between intent and deployment. That signal is the Clarity Act, converting XRP's commodity classification from a joint SEC-CFTC interpretive release into permanent federal statute. But that's not even the most important institutional development this week. What I'm about to show you is the piece of data that made me go back and reread the timeline 3 times. Because it changes the interpretation of everything Goldman just did. And it explains exactly what the 65% on the sideline are waiting for at the legal architecture level. On March 17, 2026, the SEC and CFTC jointly classified XRP as a digital commodity alongside Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana. That classification is real. It is documented. It is cited in institutional compliance memos across the financial system. And it is not law. Here is what that distinction means in practice for a bank's compliance department. A joint SEC-CFTC interpretive release is an administrative determination. It reflects the current regulatory agency's view of how existing law applies to XRP. But the agencies that issued it can be replaced. A future SEC chair can reinterpret or reverse that classification without a single congressional vote. A new administration with different priorities can instruct the CFTC to reconsider. No floor debate, no committee hearing, no public accountability. Banks understand this perfectly. It is why Ripple's on-demand liquidity product, which uses XRP as a bridge asset for cross-border settlement, has not yet scaled to the major institutional banks that Ripple has been building toward. Those banks can cite the commodity classification in their analysis. They cannot build irreversible infrastructure commitments on top of a regulatory opinion that a future director can undo. The Clarity Act changes that equation at the root level. When the bill passes and reaches the president's desk, XRP's commodity classification becomes permanent federal statute. Changing it would require a new act of Congress, full legislative debate, committee votes, floor votes, reconciliation between both chambers, presidential signature. Not an agency memo, an act of Congress. That is the legal durability that the current framework cannot provide. And according to Ripple President Monica Long, on the record, the company has institutional partnerships locked behind NDAs that expire the moment the bill passes. Deutsche Bank has already gone public with its XRPL integration. What is behind the rest of those NDAs is the pipeline that does not move until the statute exists. Standard Chartered's analyst Jeffrey Kendrick has quantified what the statutory event produces on the ETF side alone. $4 to $8 billion in additional XRP ETF inflows from institutional capital currently on the sideline for want of permanent legal cover. That is on top of the $1.53 billion already accumulated. JP Morgan's forecast agrees. $4 to $8.4 billion in first-year inflows post-passage. The statute is the trigger, not the opinion. Now, before you get too excited, and I say this because the calendar mechanics here are brutal, and most coverage is softening them, there is a catch. A specific, documented, time-sensitive catch that Senator Cynthia Lummis has publicly called our last chance. And if you don't understand it, you're misreading the urgency of this window entirely. Let's be exact about the timeline, because the numbers here are not flexible. The Clarity Act passed the House in July 2025, 294 to 134. Bipartisan, strong margin. That was 10 months ago. Since then, 2 failed Senate markup attempts. The first collapsed in January 2026, when Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong withdrew support and over 100 amendments were filed. The second stalled in March over stablecoin yield provisions. As of this recording, the Senate Banking Committee has not scheduled a markup date. Chairman Tim Scott has stated publicly that the markup may not happen in April at all. 3 unresolved issues still need to be worked through. Senator Cynthia Lummis has been direct in a way that no other member of Congress has been. Her public statement, "This is our last chance to pass the Clarity Act until at least 2030, not 2027, 2030. That is not rhetoric. That is the midterm calendar math. Galaxy Digital's Alex Thorne has calculated the operational reality, with only 18 working weeks remaining before the midterm recess on October 5, and with each week of delay compressing the legislative window, missing the May threshold makes full passage structurally implausible. Senator Bernie Moreno has stated explicitly, if the bill does not reach the Senate floor by May, digital asset legislation will not advance before midterm election dynamics consume the congressional calendar. The sequence that must complete before August: Senate Banking Committee markup, reconciliation with the Agriculture Committee version, reconciliation with the House version, presidential signature, 5 procedural steps, fewer than 18 working weeks. That is not a comfortable timeline. It is a closing window with a documented endpoint. And Polymarket currently prices Clarity Act passage in 2026 at approximately 60 to 63%. The market knows the window is closing. It has not fully priced what happens if it closes without the bill. And that brings us to the part most channels won't talk about because it doesn't fit the bullish narrative that drives engagement. The scenario where the window closes. What Standard Chartered's own analysis says happens to XRP if the statute never comes. And what the institutional positioning data tells you about who is buying now versus who will be left waiting if they are wrong about the timeline. Let's put both scenarios on the table without softening either one. Scenario 1. The Clarity Act clears committee in May and reaches the president's desk before August recess. Monica Long's NDA pipeline unlocks. Deutsche Bank and whoever is behind the remaining signed but undisclosed agreements goes public simultaneously. Standard Chartered's Jeffrey Kendrick projects $4 to $8 billion in ETF inflows on top of the existing $1.53 billion. JP Morgan's range is $4 to $8.4 billion in the first year post-passage. The 65% of institutional investors citing regulatory clarity as their condition finally have their condition met. ARK Invest already holds XRP as its 3rd largest ETF position. BlackRock, which has connected over $21 trillion in institutional assets through its Aladdin platform, has been identified by insiders as targeting a late 2026 XRP ETF filing, contingent on seeing consistent results from the existing ETF complex. The statute changes that calculus immediately. The institutions who entered through Goldman's facilitation are no longer the early signal. They become the first wave. Scenario 2. The markup slips past May. Midterm politics activate. The banking lobby, the largest donor class in American politics, gains exponential leverage as election cycles concentrate senators' attention on their constituent base. The bill does not clear before October recess. It is not revisited until 2027 at the earliest. Senator Lummis said 2030. Standard Chartered already modeled this scenario in February, when it cut its 2026 XRP price target from $8 to $2.80, its largest percentage forecast reduction across any crypto asset. The bank's reasoning: long-term institutional capital never showed up in size without the statute, and ETF momentum fades without permanent legal cover. The $1.53 billion in current ETF AUM, impressive as it is, represents 84% retail money. The institutional wave has not arrived. Without the statute, it does not. Without the Clarity Act, Ripple's on-demand liquidity scales in RLUSD, not XRP. Banks settle in stablecoins. XRP follows Bitcoin's macro direction with no asset-specific catalyst. The range is $1 to $1.50 through year-end. If you have held XRP through the SEC lawsuit, through 3 years of watching other assets move freely while XRP fought for its legal existence. You already know what it costs to understand something before the market prices it. That patience is not a character flaw. It is exactly the position that the 65% of institutional capital is about to reward when the statute arrives. This channel tracks the legislative calendar, the institutional positioning data, and the regulatory mechanics every week, so you know which scenario is developing in real time before it becomes a headline. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the next 30 days produce one of two outcomes for XRP holders. And the difference between understanding which one is coming and finding out after the price move is exactly what XRP News Flow Signals is built for. Let me leave you with the 3 documented signals that will tell you which scenario is actually developing. Because watching the mechanics is more useful than watching the price. Signal 1, a markup date from Chairman Tim Scott. Not a public statement about progress, not a comment about working through issues, a formal notice, a date on the Senate Banking Committee calendar. That is the only first-order confirmation that the legislative sequence has been engaged. Everything before that is noise management. A markup notice is the signal. Signal 2, the Tillis stablecoin compromise text. Senator Tom Tillis is expected to release a revised draft of the stablecoin yield compromise. The March 20 version, which bans passive yield but allows activity-based rewards tied to payments, was rejected by Coinbase on March 25th, then accepted 2 weeks later after a White House Council of Economic Advisors report found a full ban would cost consumers $800 million per year. The revised Tillis text, when it drops, tells you whether the yield dispute is genuinely resolved or whether another delay mechanism is being constructed. Watch the text, not the press release. Signal 3, Ripple's NDA announcement wave. Monica Long has confirmed the pipeline exists. Deutsche Bank is already public. When the next institution announces its XRPL integration publicly without being under an active NDA, the statute is either signed or signing is imminent. That announcement does not come ahead of the legal event. It comes because the legal event has occurred or is days away. These 3 signals in sequence are the documented confirmation that the statute is real. Everything else is the market waiting for what Goldman's trading desk has already been told by its clients is coming. Drop 1 word below. Statute, if the legal architecture distinction landed. Calendar, if the timeline mechanics are your primary concern. This shapes the next video. XRP News Flow Signals. Data, not noise. Structure, not hype. See you in the next one. Not financial advice. Always conduct your own research.